welcome back to my channel. Yes, today's Thursday, and thank you for clicking. But let's start with greetings. We get ahead of ourselves so much. Hello, my name is Daniel. I'll be your host here.
Guy in the chair.
He said it. He said it.
And today we hear the croaker drinker's thoughts on why there would never be an equal to Lord of the Rings trilogy. I think it's great, but I don't think Amazon did a good job when they came out with their little high dollar whatever. So either way, enjoy. So enjoy.
You know, being a kid who grew up in the 90s was a bit of a weird experience now that I think about it. To paraphrase Tyler Durden, we were the middle children of history who never really had a unique thing of our own. And by that, I mean that we lacked a unifying cultural phenomenon that bound our collective consciousness together, the kind of iconic movie franchise or TV show that anyone who grew up in that time could point to and say, see that? That was my childhood right there. I mean, don't get me wrong, there were plenty of older things to choose from. Indiana Jones, Back to the Future, The Terminator and Aliens movies were all awesome, but they all hit the cinemas long before my generation were old enough to see them. They were never really ours. Even Star Wars kind of passed us by because we grew up in that weird no man's land between the two big trilogies where nothing much was happening in a galaxy far, far away, and so not many kids were interested in it. All of this is to say that growing up in the 90s felt a bit like living off the slightly stale leftovers from someone else's cultural banquet. Yeah, it did the job, I guess, but it's not exactly great for your self-respect. But that all began to change as the decade drew to a close, and we began to hear rumours of a new fantasy trilogy in the works, a big-budget adaptation of Lord of the Rings, no less. Now, I can't begin to tell you how excited this made Teenage Drinker feel, because I'd been a fan of the books for years by that point and absolutely fallen in love with the world of Middle-earth. And keep in mind, this was a very different, less cynical time when movie adaptations of beloved properties weren't greeted by collective groans from the fan base and questions of how badly they were going to screw it up to cater to modern audiences. There was a real feeling of collective optimism, of the time being right, of anything being possible. But even in the midst of all this optimism, there were still doubts. After all, Lord of the Rings was the most iconic fantasy story of all time. Could Hollywood really do it justice? Could they hope to recreate the epic scale and scope of Tolkien's world? Could the actors possibly inhabit these larger-than-life characters? And could it all be pulled together by a Kiwi director best known for low-budget splatter flicks like Brain Dead? Well, in December 2001, we found out. And within about 5 minutes of Fellowship of the Ring kicking off and that gloriously epic battle sequence against Sauron, I pretty much knew they'd gotten it right. Somehow they'd found the perfect tone, the perfect look and feel, the perfect soundtrack, and the perfect actors to make this all work. And the more it progressed, the better it got. Every character arc, every great battle, and iconic scene, and poignant line of dialogue from the books was right up there, faithfully recreated for all the world to see. And 2 years later, when Return of the King brought the epic story to a close in the most satisfying way possible, I knew I'd finally found it. The thing I'd been looking for all throughout my childhood. The pop culture phenomenon that my generation could at last call their own. The trilogy I could point back to and say, see that? I got to be part of that. Plenty of others might have enjoyed it since then, but we were actually there when it happens. And looking back on it all now, 20 years down the line, thinking about everything that's come and gone in those 2 decades, I was struck by kind of a sad realization. The Lord of the Rings might well have been it. The best we were ever going to get. The high point, the apex of pop culture cinema. Something that I just don't think we're ever going to top. I mean, don't get me wrong, other franchises have raked in far more money than Lord of the Rings ever could. Individual movies might have told their stories in smarter, more innovative and artistic ways. Modern blockbusters with the benefit of better technology might have delivered even more impressive visual spectacle, and other actors might have turned in subtler or more complex performances. But for me, the Lord of the Rings trilogy represents the true high point of big-budget Hollywood filmmaking, the perfect marriage between artistic integrity integrity and crowd-pleasing spectacle made at just the right time in our history when one didn't have to be sacrificed to cater to the other. And I think it's interesting now to look back on all the reasons why it succeeded so well in the first place. For a start, there's the visuals. I mean, these movies have been rightly praised for their visual effects, which still hold up pretty well against the best that Hollywood can produce today, which really gets you thinking about how little progress this industry's actually made in the past 2 decades. But it's easy to forget now just how much of them were filmed in real locations using practical effects, how many towering cities and castles were actually just intricately constructed miniatures enhanced by CGI. And that's the key thing to remember here, enhanced. CGI has definitely got its place in filmmaking, but it's supposed to be used to enhance rather than replace real locations. It should be used to do the things that are impossible with practical effects, not as a lazy crutch to avoid having to step outside that lovely air-conditioned soundstage and maybe get your hands dirty once in a while. Seeing the actors walking through real fields with real wind in their hair, or hiking across real mountaintops, or sailing down actual rivers is infinitely more engaging than any amount of superficially impressive volume screen bullshit, because you know that they're actually there doing this stuff. It makes the world they inhabit feel like a real place rather than a video game cutscene. And even all the risks and problems they encountered along the way somehow contribute to it all. When Viggo Mortensen chipped a tooth after taking a sword to the face, or broke his toe with that epic helmet punt, or Sean Astin took a chunk of glass through his foot, or Orlando Bloom broke a rib falling off his horse, it's a sign of the dedication and the occasional risks that they had to take to get this thing made. And again, it's a sign of the very different time that we live in now. These days, there seems to be this weird aversion to any kind of physical hardship or discomfort or risk-taking, not just in film projects but in life in general, and it's so fucking depressing because you can see the obvious results of this in the kind of people that it creates. And if you need an example of this, then just take a look at the cast interviews for Rings of Power, where everyone involved is so young and soft and diverse and artificially happy that it reminds me more of an HR commercial than a serious insight into a landmark film project. Everyone's so blandly agreeable, so non-confrontational and careful not to say anything offensive that, as Echo Chamberlain once remarked, they are, if not complete pussies, then at least pussy adjacent. The kind of people that have never held anything more dangerous than a pair of safety scissors and probably needed therapy for it afterwards. And if you pay attention to what they actually talk about, they seem a lot more interested in discussing how groundbreakingly diverse they are, or the activism that's apparently so close to their hearts that they barely have time to talk about the characters they play or the experiences they've had. Hollywood used to depict heroic actions, now they can only see heroic identities. They used to champion escapism and wonder, now they push allegory and agendas. Compare this to the cast interviews or the behind-the-scenes footage from the original Lord of the Rings, and you really get a sense of how focused and dedicated everyone was to doing this right, almost to the exclusion of all else. Whether it's the costume department dutifully putting together hundreds of suits of chainmail armor by hand, or Viggo Mortensen carrying his sword around everywhere he went, even when he wasn't shooting, or Ian McKellen having a copy of Lord of the Rings with him on set for references, there's this real sense of respect, professionalism, and camaraderie. These guys really seem to want to do Tolkien's work justice, even if the process was long, grueling, and physically demanding. The actors and writers and showrunners of today seem to actively despise everything he was and everything he represented, and they certainly don't seem interested in putting in the work needed to represent it properly on screen. When I see characters like Aragorn or Boromir or Éomer charging into battle, I really believe what I'm seeing because the actors actually look like they could do this stuff. They've been through lots of hardships and physical challenges along the way, and it's reshaped them into men who can believably play heroic characters like this. And I say men specifically because, well, this really is a story about masculine bravery and heroism. Two things that modern Hollywood seems to be fucking allergic to now. The Lord of the Rings trilogy was never afraid to depict men as brave warriors, wise leaders, cunning strategists, and noble protectors because, guess what? Those are the roles that they've filled throughout all of human history, often without much thanks or recognition because that's what they were expected to do. Tolkien understood this, Peter Jackson understood this, and so does everyone else with more functional brain cells than a retarded jellyfish. Unfortunately, Hollywood writers today don't fall into any of those categories, and so instead, every potential moment of male heroism or self-sacrifice in modern storytelling has to be undercut by some shitty piece of meta-humor or a strong, diverse woman who solves the problem all by herself. And the results are as predictable as they are depressing. Nobody buys into this stuff because it goes against everything we know to be true, and yet there they are, stubbornly trying to sell it to us year after year, still trying to push the message. And that brings me to the often repeated interview with Peter Jackson, which perfectly illustrates why these movies succeeded so well 20 years ago, while almost everything else put out by Hollywood in recent years is on a downward spiral into oblivion.
We didn't want to put any of our own, certainly in terms of the thematic material, we didn't want to put any of our own baggage. I mean, we had no interest in putting our messages into this movie, but we thought that we should honour Tolkien by putting his messages into it.
This right here is why Lord of the Rings got it. This is why people still talk about these movies 2 decades later. This is why they're going to be beloved by generation after generation. And it's why I don't think we're going to see the likes of Lord of the Rings ever again, because the conditions that allowed those films to get made simply don't exist, and I don't imagine that they're going to be coming back anytime soon. Hollywood is a very different place now. The writers and actors are very different people. The entire culture of storytelling is different. But you know what isn't different? The fucking audience. There's still the same hunger for escapism, for new worlds where adventure and wonder are everywhere. There's still the same desire for heroic characters battling evil enemies, tales of friendship and sacrifice and bravery that aren't tainted by tedious modern political agendas. There's still the same need for stories that elevate our spirits, that inspire us to be better, to see beyond the trivial problems and drudgery of everyday life. Which probably explains why shows like Rings of Power, that try so painfully hard to bend Tolkien's world and characters around modern sensibilities, have already been forgotten before they've even finished their run. And you know what? I'm okay with all of this, because the story that really mattered has already been told, and told really fucking well. It's out there now, it belongs to all of us, and no matter how much modern writers might try to warp or twist or reshape it into their own vision of what we should want, it can never be taken away, because some things really do stand the test of time. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.
Hey guys, now that's what I'm talking about. There'll never be another Lord of the Rings trilogy. It was really great, and nowadays everybody's pushing the message and agendas, this agenda, that. Fuck that noise, excuse my language, but really you just want good entertaining stuff. I was so excited when I heard Amazon was coming out with a type of the Rings of Power. I was excited, and then I saw it. I was like, and they had Galadriel. It's like, that's how she was in the books or Lord of the Rings. That noise there. And that activist people. They don't care about the source material. They just don't care at all. But still, that's all. Get ready to just enjoy what we have, because that's out there. It can't ever be changed. You only had 2. But if you like what you saw, don't forget to like it, comment down below, and then finally subscribe. Hit the notification bell to be notified every time I post a new video, and share. Bye.